Greetings. Welcome to the Historical Boxing Society podcast. This is the historical overview of the fighter Dan Creedon. Creedon was from New Zealand, as another famous Australian boxer, Bob Fitzsimmons. Both of them came to Australia and boxed out of Australia, as Creedon was part of the Australian boxing classes. Creedon stood 5'8", so he was 1/2 inch shorter than Billy McCarthy, which was not a very big middleweight. Creedon kind of reminds me very much of a poor man's version of Tom Sharkey, who also was, I think, 5'8.5". There's a photo of Creedon that I'm going to put here where he very much looks like Tom Sharkey. Kind of a short build, very stocky frame. Creedon didn't nearly have the power that Tom Sharkey had, but he had much more scientific ability than Sharkey had. So Creedon started his career basically like a incredible prodigy, as he never really lost through the entire beginning of his career. His days in Australia, I kind of wish that he would have taken on more of the Australian fighters of the scene. The only Australian fighters he fought while he was over in Australia, starting from 1890, would be Tut Ryan, which he got a 30-round draw with. He fought a quick 8-round bout with Jim Hall, which certainly did not prove who was superior between the two. I wish they would have had a rematch there. And then he fights Starlight Rowlands, which, is not a top-notch Australian. And then he, of course, was known as the conqueror of Buffalo Costello. Now, this is Costello, right, kind of as he's coming out of his semi-retirement, and not quite the fighter that he was, but nonetheless, Creedon gets the best of him and then awards him a rematch and proves once again that he's better than him. But Creedon missed, I would say he missed a rematch with Jim Hall there to prove who was better, as Hall was certainly one of the top Australians. He did not fight Mick Dooley, and he didn't fight Tom Lees or any of these other top Australian fighters there, as he really only fought a handful there, enough to count on one hand, not very many. So, as I stated, Creedon is a little bit linked with Bob Fitzsimmons. They came over together into America at the same time. They were pretty good friends, even though they did fight each other. Creedon gets his first fight in America in 1893, and of course, this is a gigantic match as he's fighting Alex Greggins, and Greggins had beat the other Australian. I guess he was American, but the other Australian that came back from Australia in Buffalo Costello. So Greggins had a pretty huge reputation, and this was a pretty big match. And of course, Dan Creedon beats him as he's just mowing down the competition here. And of course, one of the great things that Dan Creedon is known for is just, in my mind, is just embarrassing Frank Childs when they meet, as Childs literally sat on the ring floor to avoid some of the punishment that Creedon was dishing out to him, as the renegade type of big, powerful American fighters were not much match for the very well-schooled scientific academic fighters such as Creedon, who, they were much more schooled than a renegade American fighter such as Childs. So all of this led into some big super matches that Dan Creedon was part of, and the very first being his fight with Fitzsimmons, as he finally gets Fitzsimmons out of the idle stage and gets him in the ring, and they produce pretty good match there as Fitzsimmons gets the better of Creedon. And at this point in 1894, he delivers him his first loss. So 5 years into his career, Creedon went through his career without having a single loss. His very next match, he, with a competitive rounds fighter, is against Joe Choyinski. Choyinski gets the better of him here too, and this, according to Creedon himself, kind of perpetuates the downfall that Creedon is going to go into as he develops a little bit of a drinking habit after losing to both Fitzsimmons and Choyinski. Now, it's going to take a while for it to surface, but this is where it starts because he was kind of in depression from his losses. Choyinski helps him out quite a bit. He is second to him in numerous times in his career. But anyway, Creedon rebuilds up his prestige after the losses to Fitzsimmons and Choyinski, and he participates in one more super match, as this is a very, very big match, and this is for the middleweight championship of the world after Fitzsimmons, of course, abandons the title to go to heavyweight. A match is made with Kid McCoy and one Dan Creedon in one of the super matches, as this was front page headlines leading into this fight, which is not happening very often. So Creedon again fails to take advantage of the situation, and he gives McCoy a outstanding bout and ends up losing in 15 rounds to Kid McCoy. So Creedon is one of the few fighters, unlike the last fighter, Kid Carter. Creedon is 0 for 5 on the beginning of his level ups, as every big match that he has with a guy a greater caliber than him, he ends up losing. Jim Corbett described Creedon as too big for a middleweight and too small for a light heavyweight. As I stated, he's only 5'8", and he got to the point when he started drinking. It's pretty easy to put on a weight on a frame of a 5'8", and Creedon throughout the later part of his career was constantly being referred to as losing steam in his punches. For one of the major handicaps he had is when he lost his bout with Jack Bonner. He fell, twisted his ankle, and then had ankle problems all the following year, and really had a hard time getting himself back in shape because he couldn't do cardio, because he couldn't run or do anything because of his bad ankle, which really led into his downfall. As Creedon followed the pattern of many of these previous fighters, most notably I can think of off the top of my head is Dick O'Brien. As soon as they hit the age of 27, as I stated, that's one of the ages that these fighters of these original Pioneer era fall right off the cliff. Creedon was one of them. He really did not age that well but he continued to fight. He did have a little bit of luck here and there, but he kind of fell off the map after he developed the drinking problems and such after the Jack Bonner match, which was in 1898. He only had really a couple more years of fighting years left in him, and he has a limited success with that. One of the parts he does have with success, though, is one of the great achievements of Creedon, when he describes, in his own words, when he came back to Australia, one of the very few matches that he said that he was in good shape for was when he fought Bill Doherty. And this is pretty cool because it's the original Australian crowd, Creedon launched in the year 1890, and Bill Doherty was 5 years after that, so they were the new version of the Australians. So we got a match when Creedon came back to fight Doherty of the old school versus the new school in Australia. And of course, as I stated, this was one of the matches that Creedon said he was in shape for, and he got a 5th-round knockout over Bill Doherty, late into his twilight careers, and he was rejoiced through all of Australia as, the king has returned, because that was his return to Australia. And, in that one small window of time, Creedon was successful once again, and he went out like a champion that he was. As Creedon never really lost in the beginning of his career. He mowed down all the people that were put in front of him. And, there was many good boxers mixed in there, from Buffalo Costello to Alex Greggins to Frank Childs to Dick Moore to Jim Hall. I mean, to Tut Ryan. To Starlight Rollins. There's a lot of fighters in there. And Creedon, I think, was pretty easy to judge, as he was certainly much better than the renegade sluggers such as Dick O'Brien and such. And he was not better than most of the Class A fighters. So Creedon falls right here in the rankings as a lower level Class B fighter, which I think is pretty accurate. As I probably stated before, I'm not making these rankings. These are done by simulation. I would certainly have Kid Carter ranked ahead of Dan Creedon, but this is where simulation put him, and I wanted to do it this way because I don't want opinion driving the data here. I don't really believe in opinion, and so we need something outside of the realm of opinion, and this is where the simulation put him. Creedon had a lot of success in simulation. Not super successful, but he proves right where, he falls there in the lower level of the Class B fighters. Creedon was right in the fold of Fitzsimmons and Corbett, as Creedon sparred with Corbett, and they were all talked about right in the same realm of breath, right when they were all coming up, they were mentioned with each other. And for instance, Corbett certainly picked Creedon to beat Kid McCoy, as Creedon was the favorite going into that match, as Kid McCoy not quite established himself fully yet, as he was only 25 years old at the time. And of course, post-match, all the headlines were Kid McCoy is a wonder, and poor Dan Creedon was kind of forgotten by the wayside. But just prior to that match, his reputation was still pretty darn good. And of course, one of the coolest things about Creedon was that Jem Mace, when he was all done in his Australian stuff, came over here and was in the corner for one of Dan Creedon's big fights, as he was, of course, mentoring the Australian fighters, and Creedon was from the Australian fighters. And what a great treat to have, the esteemed knowledge of Jem Mace in your corner for one Dan Creedon. So that is the historic overview of Dan Creedon. A very good fighter, but not a great fighter. He's falls in the lower level of the Class B fighters, and he is ranked right here at the low 40s.